Okay, I'd like to open the meeting of the Finance Investment Committee of the Vallecitos Water District today, Monday, April 27th at 4 o'clock. Notice to the public due to the evolving situation with the COVID-19 novel coronavirus and Executive Order N-35-20, so long as state or local public health officials have imposed or recommended social distancing measures, Vallecitos Water District will hold future meetings via teleconferencing and allow members of the public to observe and address the meeting telephonically or otherwise electronically. During this period of time, Vallecitos Water District will not be making any physical location available for members of the public to observe the meeting and offer public comment. The public is encouraged to watch and participate in the meeting from the safety of their homes. The meeting can be viewed on the agenda page located on the main page of the district's website. Public comments or questions can be submitted to the following email address: publiccomment@vwd.org. All written comments that are received 90 minutes before the meeting will be provided to the board, and a record of the receipt of comment will be noted during the meeting. I call the meeting to order. Items for discussion, there are two. We have a budget update and our cost of service study update. So I'll turn it over to Glenn Pruitt. If you can just tell me if we have any attendees.
Yeah, I have to stop sharing this and then I'll let you know.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, it looks like we have 3. So, but nobody right now, it's not public comment, so nobody has their hand raised to make a public comment. So maybe we could do public comment at the end of the items for discussion, if that would be okay.
Certainly.
All right, Ann, if you can remind me when we get done with the items to open that up. So, okay, so item 1 is a budget update. This is, we're still in the sausage making phase, so we're showing you preliminary data as it's developed. So we've gone over the materials and supplies on previous meetings. We looked at the CIP, and now we're going to be focusing more on the impacts to reserves as we look at the FY21 budget and the 5-year forecast. So I'm going to turn it over to Wes, and hopefully Wes can share his screen now and walk you through the presentation.
Okay, can you see that?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So yeah, as General Manager Pro mentioned, we are getting towards the end of the sausage making. So you should have received a preliminary draft budget in your email. So we've put all the pieces together as a draft. However, we're still revising and refining it, so keep that in mind during the presentation today. So welcome back to the Budget Street and Savings Avenue. So the agenda for tonight is we're just going to go over the budget background and progress, the calendar like we usually do, just to catch up on things. And we'll talk about the budget update, which is going to be developing the reserve projections today. We've done a lot of the rest of it with the operating expenses and the capital projects and salaries and benefits. And now we're going to be working on the 5-year reserve projections. Then we'll talk about some COVID-19 considerations, things we're looking at, and possibly developing a separate budget or a modified budget. And then we'll go into the cost service study update, which is basically just a tentative calendar, and talk a little bit about what that entails. So budget calendar, just kind of going through what we've been through so far. Internally, we did the actual audit numbers and the 20 projections. Then we started putting the departmental budgets together. They submitted them to accounting, and accounting put them into the operating budget. We had a meeting on March 2nd to go over the budget calendar and the budget versus actual. After that, we went over the operating budget requests with the O&M manager, and I don't think James was in that one, but Ed was there for that. So we talked about all the requests, and those were put into the budget. On April 13th, we went over the capital budget requests. Both Ed and James were there to discuss all the capital budget requests. And those have now been put into a preliminary draft budget. And we've developed a preliminary long-range plan with the reserve projections. So we are here today at the Finance Committee meeting, and we'll be talking about those. We'll be reviewing the reserve projection. So moving on, this is on page 11 of the draft. If you're looking at it on paper, if you're looking at it digitally, it's page 17. You have the PDF open, you can just go to page 17 PDF, and this is a summary of that page. So first, I want to the highlighted line here. Operating expenses. That's what we've done to date. So we've gone over all the operating expenses, salaries and benefits. It's all rolled up into that number. That's just a summary of where we're at, and then we'll look at the budget for 2021 is $12.5 million. Then we're going to talk about water sales, ready to serve, water purchases, and then the net of the revenues over expenses, which is the transfers to replacement reserve. And those transfers are used to cover the cost of replacement capital projects. So Mike's going to talk a little bit about how we got the water sales, ready to serve, and water purchases now. So I'll turn it over to Mike Arthur.
Thanks, Wes. So this slide is, we have a lot of data behind all the data that we show you guys. And last year, this is kind of how we presented it. So we get the 270,000 lines of data that you guys have seen before and sum it all up. And what we can do is project what our sales are going to be for the next year by the meter size, which is how we charge. So on the left part of the screen, you'll see that this is units of water sold. So really, to cut down to the end, we're going to sell about 5.7. We're projected to sell about 5.7 million units of water. And through my model, we're able to tell how much is allocated through tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3. So on the next side, on the right side, it's that units of water converted to dollars. So that 5.7 million units of water sold will equate to about $28.6 million in commodity revenue. And in addition to that, for the purchases, purchasing that much is going to cost us about $30.8 million. So if we go to the next if you look down at the bottom, we went over this last year, is that the amount of water we sell in tier 1. So if you look on the left side, the orange, you'll see tier 1 water, we're going to sell about 40% of our water is going to be in tier 1. Go to the right side, tier 1, that 40% equates to about 30% of our revenue. So what I want you guys to just be aware of is that it's not a one-to-one relationship. As water sales cut back by 5%, it's not a one-to-one, we're going to cut back 5% of revenue. That's specifically seen if you look at the tier 3 now. The tier 3 is about almost 15% of our water sales, but it makes up about 27% of our water revenue. So what's that important is that if we have heavy rains or customer demand slows, is that we will see a greater impact on our budget. So the next slide will kind of show that. So the commodity budget right now, which is the revenue portion of it, is in the budget right now at $28.55 million. The purchase water, as we just showed on the previous slide, is about $30.8 million. On the next column, it'll show what would happen if we had a 10% sales reduction. So the 10% sales reduction would affect our bottom line. The net is about $1.6 million. So it would be a 12.5% decrease in revenue and a corresponding 6.3% decrease in water purchases, the amount that we pay basically to the water authority. This is the sensitivity analysis, by the way, that we saw last year. So I go bookends, 10% decrease in water to, and you'll see all the way on the right, to 10% increase in water. So the next one is the same type of scenario, but just with a 5% sales decrease. So a 5% sales decrease would be about $825,000. Oops, and that shouldn't say 63%, that should say 6.3%. I messed up on my decimal right there. I'll blame it on Dewey. The next column would be a 5% increase in demand. So the 5% increase in demand would have a net bottom line, which would be, and the net bottom line is how much we would transfer to reserves. So if we had a 5% demand increase, it'd be about another $770,000 transferred to reserves. And then the last column is a 10% sales demand increase. It'd be about 1.6 million. So I'll stop there for a second if there's any questions. No? Okay. So the next slide will kind of summarize, one more. The what if. Oh, I think I'm done actually. Oh, good. If I can turn it over to Wes, I think I'm done.
Okay.
I have one question for Mike.
Yes.
Is it too early to ascertain, or is there any way to ascertain what the COVID-19 virus? Obviously, we have a lot less commercial use, but a lot more home residential use.
Right. That's a
Is there
very
any?
good. Yeah, that's a very good question. And right now, specific to Vallecitos, I don't think we have those numbers. There's been studies, and I think, Glenn, you're going to talk about it a little bit. There have been
Yeah.
studies, general studies that have kind of shown estimates, but we have to apply that to our mix of customer base, which the model that I have can do if we know that non-residential to commercial industrial, which, like you said, Director Martin, we'll probably see a big hit. So if we say commercial industrial is going to show a 30% decrease, 40% decrease, 50% decrease, I can plug that into this model along with the corresponding, 4, 5, 6, 7% increase in residential. And then we can see what those bottom line numbers are. The kind of issue right now is that with March and April, it's been really rainy. So it's hard to tell what's COVID related, what's rain related. And the other issue right now is that a lot of our data is kind of delayed, is that the numbers that I pull are basically a month delayed. So we get a reading in February, I don't see it until March, and we don't bill it until April. So we are tracking that. And like I said, it's a very good question. It's something that we are working on. Right now, I can't really tell you what commercial is going to increase, decrease without a little bit more data.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Okay, so as we saw in the last slide for the water operations, the transfer to reserves, which is the net revenues less expenses, is going to be about $756,000 for water. So now we're looking at the sewer side of things. And this is on page 21 of the paper version, or page 27 if you're using the PDF. So this is just a summary of that. And again, the highlighted number, or this number here, is what we've done to date. So we've got all the operating expenses rolled up into this $13.2 million for sewer. And then if we look at the sewer service revenue, that's just estimated based on approximately 0.3% increase in demand with no change in rates. And then reclaimed water sales are just based on the tertiary cost plus the tertiary capital costs that will be billed to Leeuwenhoek and Carlsbad. And the net revenues over expenses for sewer is $7.8 million, which will be transferred to reserves to cover the cost of replacement or capital replacement assets. So moving on, I want to take a look at the next. So we've got operations. So now we're going to look at the capital, which was the next thing we did in the last finance committee meeting. So here's a summary of what we talked about, and here are the CIP costs projected for the next 5 years. You see 2021, we've got about $26 million, and moving over to 24, 25. Some things to note here, these are preliminary CIP costs, and we're still going through and seeing what we can do realistically and looking at priority of projects and our ability to actually get those projects done. Some bigger, if you look at 23, 24, and 24, 25, we've got a high number of CIP costs. We're probably gonna have to look at moving out to thereafter. And in particular, 23, 24, we have $35.9 million in CIP projects planned or budgeted for. Not sure that's a realistic number that we can get done, but that's what's in there now, and we will be looking at revising and refining that. And then in 24, 25, the same thing, we have $41.1 million in there. And you can see the water projects are 18.7, which is 3 times what we've got in any other year. So we'll probably be shifting some of those into the outer years once we've gone through and prioritized them.
Wes, leave it there for a second. Just as a reminder to the Finance Committee, when this budget goes in front of the board, we're only looking for approval for the first column, the fiscal year 21 numbers. So the other 4 years that are shown here are just a forecast. It's don't think that if you approve the budget in June that you're approving all those future CIP projects. You'd just be approving the 2021 budget numbers.
Yeah, that's a great point. So it's a 1-year budget with a 5-year plan or 5-year forecast. So we like to stress that every year as we present the budget. We need to prepare the 5-year forecast to be prudent financially and fiscally responsible, but it's not being approved this year.
Thank you.
So looking at that, this is actually page 97 through 101 of your draft budget on the paper version. I'm going to guess that the PDF would be 6 pages ahead of that based on the trend so far. It would probably be like 103 if you're looking at the PDF. So this is the 5-year projection summarized. And if we take a look at fiscal year 2021, which is the budget year, we start with the projected beginning balance of the reserves, which is $81.8 million. And then we have the operating transfers, which we just talked about. That's the water of 756 plus the sewer, which was like 7.8. Then the next section shows the cap fees, property taxes, RDA pass-throughs, and investment earnings. Those are all, cap fees are done with the cap fee model. The property taxes are done using, which is I believe it's a 5% increase per year. RDA pass-through is similar. It's actually using the current year's budget or current year actual. And then in 22-23, we have a 3% built-in inflator. But in 2021, it's just using this year's actual because we're not sure how much that'll be. Investment earnings is also done using an assumption of a 1.9% earnings rate. That's our current investment. It's actually 1.99 right now. We rounded it down to 1.9 to be a little bit more conservative. And then the next number is the $26.4 million. That's the actual capital outlay that you just saw. That was from that graph I just showed you from 2021. Then you have a budget for vehicles and equipment, which are actually requested vehicles for this year. The planned payout for the PERS UAL, which is our pension policy. And then we have the actual debt service, and that comes from actual debt payments, so we know what those are. So taking all that into consideration, we can then get down to our projected ending balance for fiscal year 2021 of $68.1 million. So looking at that, we look at our days in cash and it ends up being at 430 days in cash, and our debt service is well above the 115% required per our bond covenants. So we're looking good for 2021 in the preliminary draft budget. Then moving forward, we look at the next fiscal year, and this is just the plan, but based on our plan, CIP outlay and forecasts, we're at 337 in 22, and we're still above the debt service. 323 and fiscal year 23, and we're debt service is good. But then we drop down to 201 in 23-24, which I was talking about the large amount of CIP costs. That's driving that down to 201. And there you can see it's the 35.9. It's actually driving that down. And we have 56 days in cash in 24-25, and that's being driven down by the $1.1 million of CIP costs shown here. So now that we've looked at that, I want to talk about how we're considering those costs and how we can sort of account for them. We've started looking at them. One of the things we can do is we have the capacity model, which says that if we have capacity projects, we will issue debt to cover those projects. They'll be paid for by developers. So in this slide, you can see we've got a planned issuance of debt of $26 million to cover the capacity projects in 23-24 and $19 million in 24-25. Those are just the capacity expenditures being covered by debt, and that's $45 million planned so far. Doing that actually increases our days in cash to 353 for 23-24 and 312 for 24-25. Again, I can't stress enough, this is just a plan. It's not something that's being approved or is actually set in stone. It's just something we're looking at for our forecast. But we like to use 300 days in cash as our forecast because of the Fitch criteria. And this slide here shows days in cash in comparison to the median criteria for a AA rating. So the Fitch rating is or days in cash is 561 for a AA rating. And this shows historically our days in cash as well as our forecast for the next 5 years. You can see in fiscal year 2021, we'll be around 430. We're still below the 560, but we like to shoot for 300 because of their recommendation that with our other rating criteria and the 300 days in cash, we should be able to maintain our AA plus credit rating. Any questions so far? I don't want to go too fast. Okay, so this next slide shows our water reserves. Now, this is total water reserves, which is a combination of replacement and capacity. So we've got the actual from 16 to 19, and a projected from 2020 to 2025. So if we look at 2021, which is the budget year that's being presented, well, we're going to be at $25 million for our balance, and that's above the floor of 15 million. So it's almost about in between. So we're doing okay for fiscal year 21. However, 2025, it actually drops below the floor with our preliminary CIP costs, and that'll put us $7 million below our floor. So we already know that we can't do that per policy. We need to be at least at the floor. So we're going to have to look at shifting some of those costs out to future years. And given the fact that they're so high, it's not unreasonable that we could shift some out and get back above the floor. This was just a good example of how we sort of make the sausage and show you that, you know, when we first look at it, sometimes we have to grow and then we have to reallocate things and put them in line with what we can actually do. That's the water reserves. I'm going to move on to sewer unless you have questions about this. Okay, so here are the sewer reserves. And this again is a combination of both placement and capacity, just showing them in comparison to the floor and the ceiling. And you can see with the debt that we had planned, we're actually well above the floor still, comfortably above the floor, I'll say, well below the ceiling. So we're at decent levels throughout. But fiscal year 2021, we're at 43 million. The ceiling is 64 and the floor is 25. So it's a good level of reserves. And then with the debt, which I should have done this before, but with that in the outer years in 2025, sewer is at a good level at 46 million. So that's the sewer reserves, and that's actually the end of the reserve presentation. After this, I'm going to go on to the cost of the COVID update, unless you have questions.
Yeah, could you go back to the graph just prior to this? The water reserves?
Yep.
All right, go back one more. No, one more slide up. There you go. No, further back. Keep going. Yeah, right there. Actually, go back one more than that. All right. So these balances on the bottom of 201 days, 56 days.
Yep.
The capital outlay, what projects are those? It's 35 million and 41 million.
So those were actually presented at the last meeting. James could probably tell you more about it, but a lot of them are, I know we had the land outfall, and we've got several other future projects built into that.
That's exactly right, Director Martin. So basically the big hitters in those outer years 23, 24 are there's land outfall. The two land outfall projects just by themselves are in construction. That makes up for almost $18 million. And then Encina makes another 6.5 basically. So those are the big hitters in that. I mean, there's a few other projects that we're going to probably push around and push back. But basically, we got two land outfall projects and Encina on the sewer side. We got a couple tank projects that I've already talked to Wes about pushing because if the growth doesn't happen in that area, we don't need to build the tank. So it's kind of a placeholder. So we kind of push that off. And if growth happens, we'll collect some more cat fees for those areas also. And then we can push that forward if there's a demand.
Okay, but by pushing those back, if it's possible to do that, then it pushes back our need to create debt. Is that correct?
Yes, but pushing back the land outfall project is something that you will have to probably discuss a little further. But pushing back some of those other growth-related projects with for like new tanks is definitely something that there's no growth in that area now, so there's no reason to build a tank.
Yeah, Director Martin, we'll certainly be looking at the reality when we get into those subsequent years to say, is there enough demand by new development to build the project? We're certainly not going to issue debt if there's no project that we're going to build because development hasn't caused it.
Right. I guess my question would be, moving forward on this, is to continue looking at this and see ways that we can get rid of the debt.
Yeah,
I don't think we can get rid of the debt because we have too many large projects. We're going to have to be issuing debt, but it's not necessarily a bad thing because it's planned per our capacity fee model. So that's the model that we have set up. And in that model, we've planned to issue debt to cover capacity projects. And it's the only way that we can fund that without collecting developer fees. So unless we have a bunch of people come in and purchase EDUs, we're not going to be able to build capacity projects without debt.
Yeah, I guess the important thing to notice, and correct me if I'm wrong, Wes, is the debt does not affect our water rates or our sewer rates. It basically directly is part of the capital facility fees.
That's correct. And it's paid for by the capacity fund and through development. So it doesn't affect water rates.
yeah, there's no debt for replacement projects.
Right.
Doesn't presuming more debt makes us pay interest? Pay interest affects rates.
Yeah, but the interest is also paid for through capacity fees and it's figured into the capacity fee model. All debt and all interest.
Thank you.
Yeah, you'll remember that was a
Thank you.
big point of contention by the BIA. They had a lot of concerns about what percent interest were we charging in the capacity fee model.
Right, thank you.
Okay, so going back to,
So wait here, Les. So I just want to make a comment. So the Finance Committee will remember in years past, we've always shown our reserve levels being pretty high. Maybe not this slide in itself, but oftentimes our reserves are right at near the ceiling. And one of the things we've told the board and the Finance Committee meeting is that we were keeping those reserves high because we anticipated this big capital growth in the future. And that future is coming to rest right now. So I think we've been well positioned to have the reserves to allow us to do a lot of these projects and pay down the PERS without having to incur debt. But at some point in time, and it looks like it's near the end of this 5-year forecast, we really have to either significantly push back some projects or incur some additional debt. So none of this was really a surprise. We saw this coming and we've been planning all along to draw on the reserves.
Sure, thank you.
Wes, back to you.
so yeah, the next slide is just some discussion on the COVID update. So we've got the preliminary draft budget, and one of the things we'll do as we're going through and looking at the CIP projects and other costs is to consider the impacts on revenue. So I think Glenn will reference the AWWA study, which was actually produced by Vallecitos. And there are some figures in there we maybe we'll use as a source to kind of estimate what the impact might be on the district and incorporate that into our budget. We want to be as conservative as possible and take COVID into consideration. So we'll look at that and see what we should build in. And in doing that, we can't just put in less revenue. We have to look at, are there things that are there potential CIP offsets? And we've actually already started going through that. James's group is doing a good job at looking at projects and saying, can we push these out a year to absorb some of the revenue impacts? So we have several of those that we're looking at. Another possible thing that we could do is we could look at delaying the PERS UAL payment. We do have $4 million in the reserves scheduled for this year and $4 million next year, if necessary. And if we think the impact will be large from COVID, we could push those out a year. So those are some of the things we're taking into consideration in looking at COVID. And after doing that, we'll present hopefully, I think at the May 4th board workshop, if that's the date that works out for the board and for staff, we'll be presenting some of those numbers to the board.
So Wes mentioned a document, and this is a copy of the document. I don't know if you can see it or not, but it was commissioned by the American Water Works Association, and they had Vallecitos, the consultant, to help them with it. And what they did is they tried to look at what the financial impacts of the COVID-19 might be on water utilities and wastewater utilities to a smaller extent. And they looked at things like what would be the impact of reduced water sales, which is what Mike Arthur talked a little bit about. They talked about the fact that property taxes might be lowered or delayed, depending on what the counties do. Most agencies, including us, are eliminating some late fee collections. A lot of customers may not pay their water bills. So this report commissioned by AWWA laid out a methodology, and they put some numbers to it globally, or actually just nationally. We're going to use their same methodology and try to put numbers to it for Vallecitos. And what I envision that being is just at the end of the day, when we're finished with the analysis, it'll be an estimate of the lost revenue or the reduced revenue that we'll see related to COVID. And then the trick will be, what do we do about that? One tool you could do is just to draw more heavily on the reserves. The other will be to reduce your expenses to match your reduced revenues. And that's what Wes was talking about, some of the levers that we can pull. And there's not a lot, but some of them are pretty significant. For example, the CIP and the PERS payments give us a lot of flexibility to absorb some of the financial impacts from COVID. So when we go to the next meeting, which will probably be, I'm going to suggest that we do a board workshop to start to bring the rest of the board up to speed on the budget numbers. And by that time, we'll hopefully have a better estimate of what the COVID financial impacts would be. And again, that's a big crystal ball. We're relying on a study that was done for all of the US, nationwide, in the specifics of each individual water agency are very different across the nation. So we'll look at their methodology, make adjustments that we think are appropriate. But right now, we think it's about the best crystal ball we have. And I think Mike touched on it earlier. We don't have enough data right now with our billing cycle to have any local knowledge. We're starting to get that data, and we'll couple that with this AWWA report and present the board with our best estimate of financial loss. And some of that loss will be forever. So for example, if people are buying less water, that's revenue we'll never get back. Some of the lost revenue may be deferred. For example, people may fall behind in their payments. We may eventually get the money out of them when if they lose their job, stop paying their water bill. Later on, if they get reemployed, they may pay those bills, but it may shift into a subsequent fiscal year, for example. So it's not money it's not 100% lost, but it may be not available in that fiscal year. Wes, is there anything else we should touch on there?
I think that covers it unless there are questions.
No questions, but a statement, I guess. The federal government's giving away billions of dollars to companies less than 500, which we qualify for. And I certainly hope that, I know you already know we're going to experience some losses. You don't know what losses, but as a small business, as you just said, General Manager, when you cut your income, you have to cut your expenses. So I certainly hope we're looking into cutting all expenses possible.
Yes, we are. And you know, General Manager Prum actually mentioned in the discussion with him yesterday that, and I like that he said this, that the packet also refers to stimulating the economy. And if you look at our budget projections for fiscal year 21, 22, we actually have healthy levels of reserves, and those are 2021 is the one that we're looking at approving. So we may have the ability to actually continue operating and doing those projects and stimulate the economy, you know, even the possible impacts of the COVID virus. So if we're able to do that, I think it actually will help more than it would for us to try to cut back on stuff if we don't really need to.
Yeah, if you look at our kind of base budget, we have what, $26 million of capital projects proposed in FY21, and they usually use a multiplier of about 3 to 4 to show what the regional benefit is. So that's about could be upwards of $100 million benefit to the regional economy when people have, you know, hiring construction workers and they go buy other things and the money just starts circulating. So it's a big impact, and that's not our job to be the economic stimulus for San Marcos, but it's a side benefit, particularly when there's certain projects we have to get done. We can't delay them any longer. But to your point, Director Martin, we will be looking at a lot of opportunities for reducing costs to try to offset the loss in revenue because of COVID.
Yes.
Great, thank you.
Hey, Glenn, can you, at the next workshop, can you present some ideas as to what expenses you've looked at and that you're either recommending that we cut? Is that, I'm looking at kind of like along the same lines as Director Martin. I mean, when this first happened, you know, nobody really knew how long it was going to go on, and maybe it was only going to be 2 or 3 weeks, and now it's looking like it could be 2 or 3 months or even longer. At some point, if we have a prolonged period of time where the water cells are so low that it really starts to drastically impact, you know, the revenues for the district in order for us to operate, we're going to have to start looking at some other things, right?
Yeah, it depends on how deep it goes. And yes, when we go to the first board workshop, it may be preliminary, but we'll have general categories and ideas of what we're looking at based on what we see, what our projection is for COVID. And similar to what Mike did with his sensitivity analysis, we can look at, you know, if we use that AWWA manual for an estimate, we can say, what if it's even bigger than that? What's the next level of cuts we'd have to do?
Yeah. So if you could come at the next meeting with a couple of different scenarios, and hopefully you'll have some more data, some real actual data from the district to help formulate those models. But you know, it would be good for us to start at least hashing out some potential scenarios and trying to look, you know, 3 months down the road, 6 months down the road, and play the, if this continues, you know, we one option would be this, and if this continues to this point, another option might be this. I don't want to get into hypotheticals and scare anybody, but I mean, I think we need at least, you know, do a couple of those what if scenario type situations and have those conversations.
Yeah, and it's certainly our intent after we develop the methodology and start getting data, we'll start reporting to the board on a regular basis, either at every board meeting or once a month, and then compare it to projections to see how we're tracking. And those may be the triggers to go to those deeper cuts. If it's worse than we thought, then we would have like our plan B and plan C to continue finding areas to reduce our costs.
Thank you.
Welcome. All right, Wes.
Okay, so next steps. We're looking at the possibility of a board workshop on May 4th, if that works for everyone. I think General Manager Prune will be looking at setting that up, whether we want to do it on the 4th or a little bit later. At that meeting, we'd be going through the draft proposed budget and discussing board request items such as the COVID and several, you know, other scenarios like Director Snello mentioned. And after that, we'd be going to a full board workshop on May 20th, assuming there's not more work to be done. And then we would have hopefully the recommended budget presented at the June 3rd meeting. That's the calendar, at least tentative calendar. And then from there, the next subject is the cost of service study. So if there aren't any questions on what's been presented, I'll move to that.
Well, hold on. Why don't you pause for a second, Wes? I want to see, we have 2 attendees. And if there's an attendee watching this meeting and wants to say something, if you can click electronically raise your hand, there should be a little button at the bottom of your screen that shows your interest to speak. And if you're interested, I will call on you, or I'll let the board know, or the finance committee know that you're interested. Okay, I don't see anybody expressing an interest to speak.
Okay, so the next item on the agenda is the cost of service study. So this is a tentative timeline for the cost of service study for the upcoming budget year. So I really want to stress that the cost of service study doesn't mean we're looking at rate increases. Really, the hope here is that we can have Raftellus assist us and work with COVID impacts and considerations and help them build that into our rate structure and rate model. And we can use that as part of our, after we develop the budget to set future rates. But tentatively, we have July 20th as the time to begin the rate study. After that, we'd be looking at September 2020 for the results, preliminary results. Then we'd have October for a final analysis and a presentation to the board committee. And then in November, we'd look at the Prop 18 notice. We'd have the hearing in January with the possible rates in February 2021. So that's the schedule. I'm probably going to be questions on the cost of service study, I'm assuming. I guess.
Good assumption.
Not really a question, Wes, but I'm curious to see the study that was conducted and that will be presented in July, and then of course then ultimately presented to the board. But is there going to be board participation in what they're working on? Because I know we had an initial meeting, it seems maybe 5 or 6 months ago, and there was a lot of discussion and different scenarios that were discussed and possibilities. And then but now if I'm just looking at your timeline here, it looks like they're gonna do the rate study, they're gonna present the results to both staff and us, and then we're going right into kind of that analysis and implementation. But is there going to be a time where the board can actually have a conversation about what we might want to see in that?
Yeah. Sorry to interrupt, but yes, the first step in the process, and will probably happen before July. Raftelis actually spoke with Sanjay Gwar, I think is his last name. He's the president of Raftelis. And he likes to start the process by actually going to the board with possible options that are feasible and discussing with you what you'd like to see of those options. That way he can get your ideas. And so it's a narrowed focus. It's not like a broad thing, because he's not going to come to you and say, you can look at the world. He's going to tell you have these sort of possibilities, and the board can express interest in what they want us to start looking into. After that, in July, we'll start getting into it and kind of working behind the scenes.
Yeah, maybe next time when we present this to the board, we can add another column, because you'll notice, Director Sinella, these are deliverables. These are things that are being completed and presented, as opposed to the background work, which was what Wes was talking about. So prior to July, there'd be that, I wouldn't say behind the scenes, but there's no work product, but it'd be conversations with the board, in a public meeting, whether it's at a finance committee meeting or a board meeting, to talk about the things that are important. But then the deliverables are what's shown here. So we can modify the schedule to show when input is being solicited, so it doesn't give the appearance, which this might, that there's no involvement with the board prior to that first item.
Yeah, thank you.
And just to chime in, yeah, I appreciate you saying that, Glenn, because in the past, the old administration, you just presented deliverables. And I think it's important for our consultant to understand that there's a board involved, and it's not just staff's desires, it's also the board's desires.
Yeah, we understand that. And I think collectively, we all need to be sensitive as we move forward with the timing, particularly with COVID. We'll stress to the board and to the public that a cost of service study is not about raising rates. It's about making sure that the revenue that you need to get to run the operation is apportioned fairly. So that's what a cost of service study is for. And you can do that without raising rates. So it's more of a concept at first to say, hey, whatever revenue you need, how should you split it and spread it amongst your customers? And there's going to be some customers in very different situations as we go forward with COVID.
But just, the last line in your deliverable is implementation of approved rates. That tells people you're raising rates.
Well, let me put it this way. So you could find that the overall revenue that the district gets, even if it didn't change, it may be reapportioned. So for example, you may say, hey, we think our irrigation rates are too high. We should lower those. So some people may pay less, some people may pay more, but the overall amount of money that the district gets is no different. Those would still have to be approved through the 218 process because you changed somebody's rates. And some people may say it was a rate increase. Some people may say, oh, it was a rate decrease.
I understand that, but if the rates decrease, there's no need for a 218 process.
That's correct.
So this slide in itself says there's going to be a rate increase.
Well, no, I don't know if that's necessarily true because we would implement the rates even if they went down. There'd be an implementation phase. And now your question may be more related to the 2 lines above that, which is the 218 notice. So, I mean, it's likely, and I can't guarantee anything, but it's likely that water rates are going to go up in the future. When we look at Metropolitan, the County Water Authority, Encina Wastewater Authority, all those big SDG&E, all those external rate drivers for us, they're all going up. Vallecitos does not have the ability to absorb those rate increases, those cost increases without a rate increase. That's, if you look at the history of water rates, they go up every year. We try to keep it as small as possible, but it would be impossible for us to absorb those external rate driver increases. So my guess is that we will need some kind of a Prop 218 process. Some will be reallocating costs internally. Some may be to address increases that we need to mostly pay for external increases. So I don't have any, I guess I'll ask the question see if there's any of the attendees that are interested in speaking, if you want to press your push to talk or raise my hand button. Okay, no, nobody raised their hand.
So that's all I have for today. So I'll turn it over to Mr. Pruitt.
Yeah, so I guess we'll go back now. Chair Martin, it's probably the time to go to public comment unless the board or finance committee has any specific questions.
Just another request, Glenn, for the future meeting. If there's been any cost savings during COVID that the district has seen or realized, can you share that with us as well? And I'll give you an example. I know our district doesn't do a lot of traveling, but at my day job, we spend a lot of money on traveling, and we've seen a significant savings, obviously, with COVID going on.
Right.
So if there's anything like that we've noticed, the monthly spend on fuel, for example, or something like that, could you share that with us, please?
Yep. Yeah, we'll put something together on that too.
Thank you.
I've been saving a lot of money on dining out and haircuts.
Yeah. I don't, Chair Martin, I don't see anybody that's raised their hand to speak during public comment.
Okay.
So,
Well, seeing no one wishing to speak, we call to adjourn the meeting. The meeting is so adjourned. Thank you very much.
thank
Have a
you.
good night.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good night.